During the COVID pandemic, Mendham, New Jersey had something that everyone was looking for: lots of open space. One of the biggest green spaces on Mendham's map? Schiff Nature Preserve. Schiff's roots stretched back more than a century when summer heat and new money sent New Yorkers out of the concrete jungle in search of cooler air and social cachet.
Of course, these are all pre-air conditioning days, right? So the altitude and the weather was much better out here.
That's local historian Barry Thompson.
Because they were close enough to New York, and the train had come out to Burnsville in 1872, and so they could get in and out of the city, and that attracted gentlemen from New York, wealthy guys, who kind of were the impetus for the whole, what they called the mountain colony out here.
In 1912, coal heir Richard H. Williams Sr. stitched together more than 500 acres on Mendham's western rim and named it the Brook Race Estate, which hosted high society through the 1920s. Fast forward roughly 7 decades to the 1990s. The private oasis of the wealthiest 1% is now more than 300 acres of public open space run by the Schiff Natural Lands Trust. When my family arrived in October 2020, Schiff was a godsend. We hiked its trails, we looked at the old manor house from a distance, and pictured the parties that once echoed there. By spring 2021, as the world crept open, we watched the woods bloom and made our earliest Mendham memories under those trees. I told everybody how much I love Schiff, and then a friend dropped a twist on me that I hadn't heard. Oh, that place? You know, it was once owned by the Boy Scouts of America? I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. Places like Schiff collect lore the way boots collect burrs, so this could have just been a legend. But the stories continued. One friend swore the first scout troop was from Mendham. Someone else claimed that Mendham was the birthplace of the Boy Scout movement. That's how tall tales work. The fish gets bigger every time the story gets told. I couldn't sort fact from fable until Barry set the record straight.
Richard Henry Williams Jr. died in 1931. Within a month or two of his death, Mortimer Schiff, who was just elected president of the Boy Scouts of America, died. And in his memory, his mother donated $250,000 to the Boy Scouts of America. They did a nationwide search for properties and ended up settling on the Brook Race Estate, and then it became the Mortimer Schiff Boy Scout Reservation.
Welcome to Hometown History, a series about the iconic places and events that make a town some place people call home. Stories that people can tell to their friends, old and new, about the place they live, did live, or will live. Today, a bonus trip back to Mendham, New Jersey, to find out what the Boy Scouts of America actually had to do with this place, and what's just campfire smoke. Let's start with some hard facts. Mendham is not the birthplace of Boy Scouts. The movement began in England, and its architect was British Army officer Robert Baden-Powell. In May 1900, after a celebrated campaign in the Second Boer War, Baden-Powell returned to England a national hero, right when Britain's boys needed a role model.
In pre-war London, they were having a huge minor crime problem with young boys.
That's Sam Fairchild. He is a Mendham Township resident, and very conveniently for us, he is an official historian for the Boy Scouts of America.
Boys had nothing to do in the city. If you were on the farms, you had lots to do, right? You were busy all day. When you're not busy, you get in trouble.
How scouting began is its own big fish story, depending on who's telling it. In some versions of the story, Baden-Powell is the one who decides to retool his military field manual, which is called Aids to Scouting, for a younger crowd.
He said, how about if we take Aids to Scouting and try to adapt it so that it would be exciting to boys?
Other times, it's the police chief and the mayor of London, hats in hand, asking for help.
And they said, you got to help us.
But in Baden-Powell's own words,
his interest in youth was further roused when he inspected a rally of 7,000 members of the Boys' Brigade. After the rally, Sir William Smith, the founder of the Boys' Brigade, spoke to him.
Could you rewrite Aids to Scouting, he asked, so that it would appeal to boys instead of to soldiers and make them into real men and good citizens? So I did that.
And it became a massive bestseller in London. All the things that you would hope came out of it.
the revised handbook exploded across Britain and Europe, J.K. Rowling levels of buzz. Around the same time, Chicago newspaper magnate William D. Boyce visited London, and according to legend, he got lost on his way to an appointment walking through the city's streets.
It was a pea soup kind of day.
And yes, legend is doing some heavy lifting here.
And Boyce there on a street corner trying to figure out his bearings. And a boy in a uniform steps up and says, "Can I help you?"
Some tellings have Boyce specifically in London looking for Baden-Powell to ask him about scouting. In reality, London was a stopover before an African safari. Others say this was his first brush with scouting on those allegedly foggy streets.
And Boyce explains what he's trying to do. And so the boy turns to Boyce and says, "Come with me." I remember reading that it was at least a few blocks. It was not like around the corner. So Boyce reaches into his pocket to give the boy a tip. And the boy says, No. I'm a scout. It's what I do. Now, Boyce was struck by that. He was struck by the construct that somebody would do something for someone else and expect nothing in return, especially a boy.
The legend continues. Boyce meets Baden-Powell, gets the green light, and brings scouting to America. In truth, they never met. But Boyce did carry a boy's guide to scouting to Africa. The safari flopped, but the ideas didn't. Back in the States, the movement accelerated. By the 1929 crash, Boyce had taken a step back from the organization he helped bring to the States. Baden-Powell remained a guiding star overseas, while American leaders, Colin Livingstone, James Storrow, Milton McRae, Walter Head, pushed growth here.
In 1931, Mortimer Schiff, who was just elected president of the Boy Scouts of America, died.
Back to this guy, Mortimer Schiff, a wealthy financier from New York who was also an early leader in the Boy Scouts of America movement. His role in our story is brief. He died a month after being elected president, but it was pivotal. Schiff made improving adult and senior scout training central to his campaign for Boy Scout president. In his memory, his mother, Therese Loeb Schiff, donated $250,000 to establish a national training center for Boy Scout leadership. And so, a nationwide search for suitable property ended at Brook Race.
And then it became the Mortimer Schiff Boy Scout Reservation.
That's how Mendham met the Boy Scouts of America, as the home of the National Training Center. And it's where the movement's modern core was forged, largely by one man, Bill Hillcourt.
He's the most famous scout in the world, more famous than Baden-Powell because so many people met him.
William Greenbar Bill Hillcourt was born in Denmark and joined the Scouts in 1920. He became a reporter for the Scouting Magazine of Denmark, and they sent him to America to find out more about how the Americans were implementing scouting. Around 1926, he got assigned to shadow a couple of staff at a Boy Scout camp just up the Hudson River. As the story goes, Bill was helping to unload tent poles.
You imagine back in the 20s, the tent poles were 4 inches in diameter and 60 pounds apiece, and they're all bundled together. And a group of them fell off the truck and landed on Hillcourt's leg and broke his leg in 2 places.
Sounds like another legend, but this mishap with the poles actually happened. With a broken leg, Hillcourt was reassigned to BSA headquarters in New York and into a very fateful elevator ride.
He arrives in New York at the office on Park Avenue, and he's waiting for the elevator, and he's on crutches. And up comes beside him James West.
James West was the BSA's legendary chief scout executive. If you're a scout, this is like sharing an elevator with a rock star. You might just pee your pants a little.
So they get onto the elevator closes. Wes knows all about him, has given permission for him to be able to come and says, tell me about how we're doing in scouting. Expecting to hear, fantastic, you guys are amazing. And Bill said, that's a longer conversation than this elevator ride. And he's a 20-year-old talking to the chief scout. He says, but I'd be happy to write you a memorandum about it.
This story also sounds like lore, but it checks out as well. And it nudges the BSA in a new direction.
Wes is intrigued. He's not happy. He wanted to get praised. But he says, okay, I would like you to do that.
Hillcourt had noticed a problem. American Scouting had a command and control vibe, adults directing, boys obeying.
Boy Scouting in America had been implemented in the first 15 years as kind of a command and control organization. The scoutmaster was in charge, would tell the boys what to do.
Which tracks, given Baden-Powell's military DNA. Denmark had taught Hillcourt a different model.
In Denmark, it was the opposite. The adults were there to keep the boys from dying. That was their job, keep them from doing something so stupid that you couldn't save them. And otherwise, they led themselves, they made their own decisions, and if they failed, they had to reboot, and they'd learn all these things. And you don't learn that in school, you don't learn that in sports, you don't learn it anywhere. But in scouting, you did.
That elevator ride helped pivot the BSA, shifting from top-down orders to boy-led leadership. By 1935, Hillcourt and his American wife lived on site at the brand new Mortimer Schiff Boy Scout Reservation here in Mendham, where the BSA was retooling its identity.
He was given responsibility of writing a Scoutmaster's Handbook.
But as Hillcourt sat down to write the program materials that would be at the core of the American scouting movement, he realized something.
It occurred to him he had never been a Scoutmaster. How can I write a handbook on something that I've never done?
So he went door to door, and he recruited boys from right here in Mendham.
Parents said, yes, this sounds exciting. The kids are hearing it from this side. They're going, yeah, that sounds like fun. So he formed Troop 1, the only nationally chartered troop. That's why it's called Troop 1.
And that's the kernel that swelled into a local legend. Troop 1 didn't found scouting, but it did field test the modern version.
Everything that went into the Scoutmaster's Handbook, everything that went into the Patrol Leader's Handbook, everything that went into the Field Book, many of the things that went into Boy's life were all tested on Troop 1.
For lack of a better term, Troop 1 was Hillcourt's guinea pigs, and Schiff was his proving ground.
When they would make the training films that had to involve scouts doing things, you can actually see them under a Troop 1 emblem. They're the most photographed scouts in the world.
Eventually, Hillcourt is editing Boys Life magazine as Green Bar Bill, handing out practical wisdom like trail mix.
I remember as a boy, I would go immediately to Green Bar Bill because I was a patrol leader and I wanted to see some ideas on how to be able to do my job better. As example, if you have a boy who's kind of lagging behind either for interest or ability to keep up, you have to pair him with your best person and you want them to develop a bond. So he kind of has a guardian angel.
So no, Mendham didn't birth the Boy Scouts, but the modern boy-led version that shaped millions, much of that was hammered out here.
I was at a Boy Scout camp in New Hampshire called Camp Carpenter. I was in a kayak. I was a good swimmer, a good lifesaver, a good canoeist, but I didn't understand the idea of a kayak. And my kayak flipped. So I'm underwater, I have to pull myself out, and I come there, and you feel like a failure. And there was a boating instructor, probably in his 20s, always goofing around, always making, jokes and made people happy, whatever. And he came over to me in his kayak. He said, okay, we're going to do this over and over again together until you get it right. Now, there's a whole thing you have to do with the oar underwater in order to pull yourself up. It took almost 3 hours. And he stuck with me for the entire time period. So I think the way I would say it is that he believed in me a lot more than I believed in me at the time. And that really struck me because he wasn't like an old mentor. He was in his 20s. He was probably just out of college. But I was really, that struck me.
Maybe he'd been trained at Schiff.
He probably had been trained at Schiff.
And from the way Sam tells it, I'm very much inclined to believe that this story is true. This episode was written and produced by Ryan Ross and Katie Feather. It was mixed and edited by Katie Feather. Our theme music is La Danse Timide by Howard Harper Barnes. Archival audio in this episode comes from the 1957 Boy Scout documentary Baden Powell, Chief Scout of the World. Find us on our website, hometownhistory.substack.com and hometownhistorynj.com, where you can donate and support the podcast. Thanks for listening.